Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying tuned. You are watching the Virtuous Woman Show, and today we are with a lawyer. Her name is Harriet, and we were talking about the rights of widows. We've discussed prior to the break on the importance of having your marriage, is it notarized? Registered. Yes, registered, having proper documents to show that you're actually married to this person, so that in the case of succession, you can follow due process and get what you need to get and sort what you need to sort out. All right, so welcome back. We'll continue with this conversation with Wakili Harriet. Thank you for coming. So before the break, we talked about the issue of the will and how that affects the way what you get and what you don't get as a widow. So maybe talk to us about that, especially in terms of the items of the deceased.
Okay. So, well, first off is that when a person dies, the first thing that comes to mind during the succession process is whether they had reduced their will into writing and or whether they do not have a will. And so the effect of having a will is that a will direct the court in the manner in which your estate is supposed to be distributed. So for instance, you have a matrimonial home, you have other properties, it will be even clear as to your personal effects. Some wills will even state whether the person wishes to be cremated or not, and where they would wish to be interred. That means to be buried, or how they would like their body disposed, the corpse disposed. So besides that, if someone dies without having reduced that into writing, and then that means the people surviving them, that is the dependents and the beneficiaries of their estate, then are left to the hands of the court. And therefore that means that depending on their closeness to the deceased, depending even on their demeanor towards their behavior towards the deceased person, this can affect whether or not they actually inherit what the deceased left behind. And for instance, if we have a case for and this is just an example, if we have a case where the widow was known to have been battering the deceased person, then we don't expect any court of justice where evidence is shown to that effect that there was intimate partner violence caused by this widow, that this widow would be the one to inherit whatever the deceased has left behind. Keep in mind that whatever the deceased leaves behind it represents their sweat, their blood, sweat and tears, so to speak. So they have invested themselves in those things. Another issue besides the relationship is the fact that sometimes you could have more than one spouse. So let's take an instance of African customary law, or if the marriage is under Islamic law and there are several spouses, because those are potentially polygamous relationships. Then if the spouse is more than one, then that will also affect what is the definition of matrimonial home. You know, is it where the deceased lived prior, or is it the separate homes that the deceased had? So ideally, in terms of natural justice, you would not expect, say, widow A to be inheriting widow B's house. So you would find that the house where they lived when this deceased polygamous man was maintaining them, those are the houses where they will continue to live in, and so in that case inherit. But a point to note is that whether it's a widow or a widower, matrimonial homes are equal property to either, with the exception of what we call a life interest. And this applies to both the widow and the widower, so that they're entitled to this property for as long as they're alive. And in the case of widows, if the widow should remarry, then she loses her right to life interest. Because remember that marriage is a cultural norm. It is conceived in culture. So it is maintained in culture. It's a product of culture. And in every culture, it is consistent that when a man marries a woman, then that woman we say is the beneficiary of this man.
Yes.
So if widow A remarries Paul, we do not expect Paul to come and live in what was Alex's, who was deceased, Alex's matrimonial home with the widow. The law recognizes that she loses that interest and has to go and live and abode with Paul, wherever Paul is lodging.
So then what happens to the house?
So what happens to the house is, if this is the person deceased was deceased with a spouse and no children. If there are no children and it was just the spouse, then this property would revert to the next of kins, or rather the extended family.
Okay.
That includes the deceased's parents.
Okay.
It could include the parents, and in the order of father or mother, brothers and sisters. Okay. And if there is neither those, there could be half brothers. There could be siblings who were adopted into the family where the deceased was.
Or if he had children.
Now, if he had children, that the first instance is where there were no children.
Okay, okay.
So that is the degree, we call it the degree of consanguinity, the relationship degrees. Grandchildren even. But then, now, if the deceased had a spouse and with children, and this spouse remarries, then the property will revert to the children.
Okay.
And so what would happen is, perhaps the children are living in different places, perhaps they themselves are also married. Then the children would agree amongst themselves, do we continue to share this home? You know, because there are families that decide, yes, we'll be having our family meetings there, we'll make it into a guest house, you know. Others decide to even convert them into libraries, you know, social amenities, sort of things. They could also agree as the children to give it for other social purposes. Like it's been known for people to even give their property to the church.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Could they sell
Others could also agree to sell.
Okay.
Yes. You dispose of and we say, let's divide the interest.
Yeah.
Or others would say, maybe the property is worth 10 million. So the ones who want to sell, could sell to the other children who want to keep the house.
Yeah,
you see,
that's a good
so
idea.
they could come into that agreement.
Yeah,
yes.
I think that's quite fair. That's quite fair in the case of no will. It makes a lot of sense. So thank you for shedding light on that. Now we've talked about inheritance of items, houses, so on and so forth. Can you inherit liabilities? Can you inherit debt? What happens in that case? The deceased has gone and he has left debt. What happens?
Well, first off is that the Law of Succession Act recognizes that the surviving spouse will be entitled to the personal and domestic properties, and then also 20% of the net estate. So the net estate comes about where the deceased has assets and they also have liabilities. So when the balance sheet of the assets and the liabilities are brought up, then the net estate, whatever remains, and these debts are part of their liabilities. So say the deceased had a mortgage or they had a car, and they also owed so and so 100,000. So what the surviving spouse would say to the court is that we intend to sell this car valued at 500,000 to defray the liability or the debt owed by the deceased person, which is 100,000. So whatever is left is 400,000. So the first 20% of that 400,000 would be entitled to the surviving spouse. But then also, if there are children, then they are beneficiaries under that estate. So they would be entitled. And in the case where the surviving spouse is a widow and it's a life interest, so what would happen, say the deceased had rentals, then they would and had taxes, you know, from rental income, you're supposed to pay your taxes. So in that scenario, then this person who becomes the administrator of the estate, who ideally in a monogamous marriage would be that one spouse. If it's a polygamous marriage, they would elect from the different houses, different spouses, wives, who will represent those houses. So the administrators are the ones who are liable to pay out from the rental income the liabilities such as debts or even taxes, because they are liabilities on the estate. And then they're also supposed to settle whatever beneficiaries require. For instance, if the beneficiaries are school-going children, college-going children, then they are to also settle the needs of those children. Yes.
Wow. Okay. Quite interesting. Quite interesting. Now, moving on, are there any cultural or social rights or expectations when it comes to widows? Like, are there some things that a widow is entitled to that is not common knowledge, or like you wouldn't know at face value? Knowing that you've dealt with quite a number of such cases, what is something about the situation that maybe we wouldn't know? Yeah.
Maybe perhaps just to say something that may cause some confusion under culture. Yeah. Because especially in taking the Kenyan setting in the African culture, where clanism is very strong.
Yes.
So in our scenario, often you would find that widows do not know that they're entitled to the personal effects. And that means the national identity cards of their spouses. Because this is what you use to process the notification of death, to get the burial permit, to get the death certificate, which is what you use to come and file in court the succession proceedings. And so that is something. Often you would find people's mothers, brothers of the deceased asking the widow for the national identity card, because they feel they're entitled to him as their son.
Yeah.
You see? Yeah. And even when roles are reversed, if it's a widower, you would find the parents or the siblings of the deceased wife saying, give us her national ID, give us her bank cards, give us the NSSF, and so personal effects really set the ball rolling. Yeah. It's hidden in plain sight. Yeah. It looks like a very simple matter for you to say, no, I will keep the national ID. You don't want to offend anyone during that process, but you need to be able to know your rights so that you can be able to claim them. Other effects are like if they have insurance policies.
I was going to enter into that actually.
If they have insurance policies, usually you're given the policy document to keep with you at home. Yeah. So it's important to have access to such, because this, and even to the title deeds, because this is what, or the lease certificates, because this is what, and the logbooks, this is what you're going to use to list as part of the estate. Yeah. And sometimes you'll find insurance companies not coming forward to say that, oh, your deceased had a life insurance with us. So it will be up to you as the widow to write to them, either on your own accord or visit their offices or through an advocate and say, take notice that the holder of this life insurance policy has since died. Attached here too is a copy of their death certificate, and so you would need such to be able to claim a right, not only for your benefit, but for also other dependents of the deceased person.
You're right. That is truly hidden in plain sight. Like it's not something I'd think about. But yeah, thank you for shedding light on that. Unfortunately, our time is up, so I'm going to allow you to give your parting shots. Anything you'd like to speak to anyone that's watching concerning this matter, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. I think maybe one more thing is to mention sometimes when one has been widowed and the spouse was previously working at a place and has access to a pension fund, especially if they were a civil servant, the widow is permitted to continue taking out the pension of the deceased person, at least for a period of 6 months, which should be able to help them to resettle before now getting into the role of being the sole head of the family or of the home. And also I would just like to say to widows, to borrow from a sermonette I had recently, is that when you have gone through loss, remember, besides accepting the loss, and part of acceptance means that you have to adjust, you have to advance. So don't hold yourself and say, fate has had it. If they want to take the chairs, let them take the chairs. If they want to take his shirts, let them take his shirts. Bora wameniachia watoto. No, you shouldn't feel that way. You should feel that you are regarded. You are regarded highly. In fact, I believe scripture says that God is the first husband of every woman, and the widow should not be any exception. So remember to accept, remember to adjust, and remember to advance Yes, it's a new beginning.
Yeah.
Yes.
Amen. Thank you so much. This has been a very, very informative show. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom with us. Absolutely. Unfortunately, that's all the time we had. I'll see you same time, same place next time. Have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.